So, I'm making this video to address just the whole kind of just the dead end situation in Canada right now for Anglos. Now I haven't explained what is an Anglo. Is it just Anglo-Saxon? Like, do you have Anglo-Saxon lineage, or is it oh, you're just culturally like an Anglo, like a traditional Saxon, Canadian Saxon? I haven't gone over that. Maybe I should here, I don't know. I just feel like it should be it's something that should be for a separate video, but basically people were bitching, for some number of years now, particularly after COVID, there was a huge rise in people being, kind of the normies, getting red pilled on Trudeau. Well, it was before that too, but I knew Trudeau. Trudeau's he's like, if you've ever seen that movie Fargo, Trudeau's like Jerry Lundegaard, And in fact, Canada itself as a country has become like Jerry Lundegaard. Where, you just put on this total facade of niceness. You put on a smile and you're all nice and happy, but behind closed doors, you're having your wife kidnapped and your son's life totally destroyed. So you can, so he could bail himself out of the debt he was in his business. If you haven't seen the film, and don't worry, I'm not giving anything away. That's basically the synopsis. So, I remember in 2016 when Trudeau bailed out that Omar Kadir guy, this terrorist, ex-terrorist, who, they bailed him out, what was it, 15 million, 16 million, 10 million? It was in the millions. It was between, I think it was somewhere 10 to 15 million, somewhere in there. Insane. I remember that day at the workplace too. I remember that day where I worked and everything, and people, I remember because there was a lot of brown folks that worked there, and some of them were pointing out just how, I remember one guy pointed out just how insane that all was, because it is totally insane. But it had been going on since, his pathology was always there, Trudeau. And it gets frustrating when all of a sudden, it's just, you just kind of hear the same rhetoric over and over and over again. The same rhetoric. Mass immigration. Trudeau needs to go to prison. Blah, 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 the LGBT stuff in schools. Good reason to take your kids out of school at this point. But the point is that there's no solutions. It's just this ranting. It's this bitching. It's this constant complaining. He needs to go to prison. Yeah, he should go to prison. Yeah, he is a psychopath. Yeah, he is he is Jerry Lundegaard with the niceness, and then behind the curtain he's selling off his wife. It's sort of and it's all symbolic too. Pierre Trudeau, he was back in 1971, he was the one who came up with the multicultural policy, the policy of multiculturalism. He's the first prime minister who basically announced that Canada doesn't really have any centralized core culture anymore. It doesn't really matter. It's, we just, we're just, I don't know what we are. He didn't know. He was supposed to figure it out, and he, what was it? What's the word? Abdicated? I think that's the word. But he didn't take up any responsibility. And that was his responsibility to do that, to assess the new rise of multiculturalism in Canada, which at the time was still white European. 1930s, there was a huge influx of Ukrainians fleeing the famine, the 1930s famine in Ukraine. influx after the Second World War, Dutch immigrants, German immigrants, stuff like this. So there was a multicultural element in Canada in the 20th century. But you just hear the same complaints over and over again, and it's like, okay. And so my thing here is that Anglos in Canada, and you know who you are, perhaps you're white European Anglo, you're culturally Anglo in the sense that you're, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're not, you're black, but you have a multi-generational identity here. You're anglicized, truly. You understand the 20th century. You remember the 20th century, or you have parents who remember the 20th century in Canada. Or you are true Saxon. You're true Saxon lineage. Or you have true Saxon lineage. Something like this. It's loose, yeah, sure, but it helps. It should be recognized that I'm not just a Canadian, because the thing is too about Canada is that the word Canadian and immigrant, these two words are just as loaded as each other. They don't really mean anything. They don't mean anything. I'm Canadian. Yeah, well, so is the Slav next door who's only been here for 20 years, So it's just like, yeah, the Anglos need to rediscover the Christian faith. What do you have left? Nothing. The culture is dead. There's nothing. We were banking off of the British identity in the 20th century. Pierre Trudeau comes along. Nope. Multicultural policy. We don't know what we are, so we're just kind of offshoot America. And then we become radically Americanized. And that's why people say things like Canada's just like America. Canada is just America. Or, what is a Canadian? They'll say that. What is a Canadian? What is a Canadian? You're looking at it, and that's it. Like, it's just, it doesn't really exist anymore. It doesn't have any cultural heft. It's all dead. White European multi-generational, Anglophones, to a lesser degree Francophones, but not entirely, I believe, are being replaced. They don't want us anymore because they don't like our lineage. They don't like our history. They don't like all of that achievement. It's competing with the lack of achievements, the lack of cultural achievements amongst all the other groups, all the other ethnic groups, all the other cultures that are now in Canada. So, it's just like, yeah, you can go ahead and, well, when are we going to learn? When Canadians, Anglos, you know who you are. They need to rediscover the Christian faith. That is it, because the truth is, ideology can't save us. You can go ahead and hate the Jeets, hate on all the Negro groups, the Muslims, you can just talk about how they, whatever, I don't know. There's too many immigrants, multiculturalism, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But it doesn't help the YouTube comments and just reporting the same stuff that's been regurgitated ad nauseum from what I've been watching 8 years. I'm done with it. I don't want to listen to it. It's just not news to me. Since 2018, it hasn't been news to me. It was just addicting. Because you wanted to stay informed, and I want to keep in touch with everything. Well, I'm just kind of done with it. I'm kind of done with the internet and the way it is, the way it's gone now. And I made a previous video addressing that. But it's just they need to just rediscover the Christian faith. Christianity is all we have left. That's it. At least find that. Because that's what I did. And You don't, it isn't the culture, it's not the stuff coming out of your screen. It's not the stuff coming out of the screens and the music that you hear playing out of people's cars and in bars and in clubs and all of this that you hear on the street in cars. You know, that's not the culture. The culture is the community and the family. Like, that's your identity, is what I'm getting at. Not culture. I shouldn't say that. But identity. So Anglos need to rediscover a new identity for themselves in order to create a new culture for themselves, in order to establish a new country for themselves, because my belief is that Canada needs to be balkanized. It needs to be broken up. And this is not a new problem. You know, it's not just because of, you know, all the Indians and all the other brown people and all the other ethnic immigrant groups. This is an older problem. It's between East and West. It's between Anglophones and Francophones. It's this kind of thing. The geography of Canada is just enormous. It's way too large. It doesn't matter if there was none of this developing world immigration. It would just we would still be faced with a lot of these same kind of geopolitical problems. You know, East and West competing economies. You know, the French want their own thing. They want to get out. I say more power to them. Let them have their own, let them have their own sovereignty. So Anglos need to, they need to, it's hard to give advice here. Like, it's hard to give advice because what do you know? Like, what do you know? Advice, it's just like, it's almost like, it's not that the advice itself is abstract and that it can be interpreted in different ways, but it's like you don't really know if it's going to help anybody. But I do know one thing. Without Jesus and without church and community, you're done. You can say goodbye to your humanity and your sanity with the way things are going now in Canada. You can say, you could just, and I don't know who's going to bash, I don't know who's going to complain out there, like Anglos themselves. They complain, I don't want the Christian faith, I don't want it. Yeah, well, what else do you have? Because all it's just the same regurgitating, the same rhetoric, the same political rhetoric. Why are they letting all these people on their keyboard? They just let them on in. Yeah, it's going to continue. It's not going to stop. It's just, it's going to just keep on going. Like, your YouTube videos aren't going to stop it. Your rage isn't going to stop it. You'll make yourself look like a fool. Now, I don't mean to be hard on Anglos here. The number one ethnic demographic in this country that has been dealt the most severe philosophical and cultural blow is white European Anglos. People will say, but what about the indigenous? Oh, we know how they feel. I know how they feel. And a lot of these people who go on about the indigenous, and the native, what do they say? Oh, it's payback. Oh yeah, it's payback, right? Yeah. So doesn't that mean that the immigrants groups coming in who are also going to take their land, aren't they also guilty as charged? No, of course not. That would actually take some spine. That would actually take telling the truth. That would take not having inundating or using this genocidal rhetoric against innocent people. Because you know what? Those indigenous, to me, those are my people too. There's a native guy in my church and he doesn't give a shit what any of those people think. Because he sees right through it. A lot of them do. It's funny, the irony is that with the indigenous, as I've read online and what I also believe, is that there are some of the most nationalistic people in the country. They can't stand the immigrants too. Either what, they're going to side with the immigrants, they're going to side with the leftists, the liberals going on bashing, arguing for white erasure in Canada. No. You need the Christian... Okay, so back to Christianity. It's like the Godfather quote, don't hate your enemies because it clouds your judgment. You can't hate these groups. You can't live life. You have to find some philosophical mode of being to avoid contempt and building hatred in your heart and in your soul. You know, you got to learn to avoid that. You don't like my language? Oh, it's so poetic. Oh, it sounds kind of cuck. Oh, it sounds kind of cucky. He's a beta. I don't care. Welcome to the faith. You know, and it's time that Anglos, and I think a lot of Anglos will, you know, start to realize that this whole, like the postmodern games you can play of irony and sarcasm and all the rest of it, there's a time and place for irony and sarcasm. There's, you know, it still has its satire. It's still got its big strengths, but the whole idea of just not taking anything seriously, not taking the human spirit seriously, not concerning yourself with you know, trying to live so you can maintain your humanity, trying to live so you can restore, so you can keep your sanity, keep your humanity. So, you know, I just think that all that's left in Canada for Anglos is Christianity. Because they hate us. They hated him too. Oh, they hated him. You know, in Canada, Jesus becomes that white Anglo that they nailed to a cross. That is, the white Anglo who took up his own cross. And, you know, maybe you're not white, whatever. You know who you are. The thing too about the Anglo identity in Canada, you know, I mean, people might, you know, that maybe you get some black Anglo, and he's grown his whole life up in Toronto. Bad deal. He's propagandized, and he believes that he's a total victim, and the world owes him a living, and blah blah blah. Of course, the African immigrants don't. They just see it as bullshit. They can see through that stuff, a lot of them. But the thing is that when you're arguing for like the whole racial identity thing, it's part of the culture. It's not fundamentally like the color of one's skin. It's just that makes up the bulk of the ethnic identity of the country. And thus, the culture revolves around that. And thus, you become anglicized. It's not the color of the skin. That's just like an identifier. I wish I could explain this in better detail. But for instance, it's like if you had you know, some non-white who was anglicized in Canada. Let's say they were born and raised here. Now, let's say they were born and raised in a predominantly white neighborhood. They went to predominantly white schools and all the rest of it, public education. Now, let's say, for good measure, this was like, oh, who knows? We'll say for good measure they were like Generation X or Millennial. Certainly Gen X or Millennial. Well, the thing is that with the propaganda against and all the cultural philosophical attacks on North American white male identity that was coming out of the United States, of course, which our universities picked up no problem and basically went, you know, injected steroids into it. But this person will become just as affected by the cultural castration of white men in the Anglosphere to either the same degree or a very similar degree as those white Anglos. They suffer all the same because that's the culture that they were brought up in. So if the men of their culture that they identify with are all have been culturally neutered and emasculated, they suffer the same. It's a cultural issue. Not just a race issue. It's a race issue, but fundamentally it's a cultural issue. So Anglos need new culture. They need to get off, young Anglos, Zoomer men out there. My advice is get off the phones, get off the screens, get off the internet. You just won't survive. Well, I shouldn't say survive. But you won't regret becoming a Christian. That's all you have left. If you care about your humanity and your sanity and the flourishing of your life and the thriving of your life and being and having an indomitable spirit and being an unstoppable force. I'm not there yet. I'm not saying I'm an example of this. But it's, that's what it gives you. A life of violence is no life at all. A life of lust is no life at all. It's not. It just eats you. So, Anglos need to get to church. They need to find churches and all the rest of it. I think that's what's best. I don't think I believe that in my heart of hearts. That's a necessity. Like, there was a story a roommate told me sometime not too long ago, and he told me about this I don't know if he was friends with the mother or what. This mother had a son of hers who was 20 years old, neat, not an education, he's a neat, unemployed. And this son was 20 years old. I think he told my roommate that he was killing squirrels and dissecting them because he wanted to see what their insides were. He wanted to see their insides. He wanted to see how their insides worked or something. And he's 20 years old doing this. Now, we've all been in dark places, some of us extraordinarily dark places. I remember when I was 19, 20 years old. When I was 20, I was in college. But I remember being 19, I remember being in a really dark place filled with rage. But I never murdered squirrels and dissected their insides. Or dissected them to see the insides. I never murdered animals, And it's people like this that, if I can save one soul like that, and that's and I don't need to, this guy's, probably a white Anglo. Most likely, almost guaranteed. Of course he was a white Anglo. I don't mean to sound like a victim here, making the victim card. But if I can save one soul like that, if I can get them into a church, how many more stories do you need to hear before the bubble pops? Before it all... And people out there... It's so extraordinarily easy to say how glorious it will be when it all just bursts. That's what we'll say. It'll just be a glorious thing, because it's the truth revealed at last. Every race for himself. I don't think it'll be glorious at all. I know why people think that. I understand completely why they think that. And I have, but it's not the answer. It just isn't gonna satiate your philosophical and spiritual desires. So, Anglos need to get outside. Anglos need to go to church. Anglos need to rediscover the faith and get off the internet and get off the screens and just lie in bed and ponder what to do with yourself, not masturbating. So, yeah, I just thought I'd share those thoughts. Yeah, it's dark, but look where we're headed. But Jesus says not to worry about tomorrow and only concern yourself with the things of the day. Confront anxieties, confront fears. Hard thing about getting off the internet for some period of time, even just a week, say, is that you confront your anxieties head on and you realize what you're truly anxious about. But the more you confront them, the more you get stronger, the more it goes away. I'm not there yet. I'm not even close. But the faith, Jesus and the Lord, they leave little seeds in you. There's little sprouts. And they stay there. It's kind of like that. It's like a separate spirit. The human will is exhaustible. So, but God's will is not. So, yeah, I think I'll just leave it there, and I think that's it for now. So, anyone watching this, any Anglos, anybody at all, just, but particularly my Anglos, you know who you are. My Anglos, I just mean like fellow Anglo-Canadians, no, there's hope. No, there's trust, and there's hope. There's hope. The true hope is when there is no hope, and that's in the Bible too, and it's in the book of Psalms. That's not the literal. That's not the literal scripture or phraseology or whatever, but that's in that meaning is in the book of Psalms. So, Godspeed, Godspeed, and well, yeah. All right. Take care to everybody watching this, and hopefully you heed the words